afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon, Lisa.
Hey, thank you. We have a very enthusiastic crowd behind us here. I'm Lisa Young, Access Services Director for Library Services, and welcome to Faculty Read Series with a twist. So the twist is that traditionally I have hosted faculty for this series, but today we're hosting hybrid faculty. So while both of our speakers have had teaching presence in the classroom, they both hold the significant role of Associate Provost. So today's speakers are Dr. Erin Mann and Dr. Molly Hudgins, and these two individuals have been integral to two university-wide initiatives. Dr. Mann for the Strategic Enrollment Plan and Dr. Molly Hudgins for the Q2 Service Initiative. I do not think that it is hyperbole to say that these two initiatives impact the daily work of our university, so I'm very grateful to have these leaders with us today. So in this informal yet thoughtful series, we invite faculty, or in this case, associate provosts, to choose a few books that have influenced their career path, or their life story, or simply inspired them in some way. They have the creative freedom to interpret the invitation as they see fit. With each installment of the series, I have personally learned something new about each speaker. Sometimes it's their passion, or their research, or a facet about their life, and sometimes it's just finding out about a great book. So my hope is that you will walk away from our time together with a little nugget or something that sticks. So without further ado, we give you our Associate Provost.
Oh, all right. Well, Molly is insisting that I have to go first, I think, because I was the English professor.
She has the English background that she deserves it for.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll see how this goes. Because I was literally in my office not 10 minutes ago, like changing my mind about which book I was gonna do. So I am an English professor by training, and I think I always knew I was gonna be doing something that was intensely involved with reading. I can remember thinking about teaching English as early as like my freshman year of high school, so I guess this career path isn't hugely a surprise. The administrative part is more of a surprise. But one of the books that I brought is one of the earliest books that I remember being really, really excited about. I think it must have been probably 6 the first time my mom read it to me. And it's Sarah Plain and Tall, which probably many of you know. It was a weekly reader book. It was a Newbery Medal winner, but it's set vaguely somewhere in the plains, and I grew up in Nebraska, so I had a really deep love of anything that had anything to do with Nebraska, and particularly Nebraska in the 1800s, kind of Oregon Trail, early settlers. I had a very romanticized view of that growing up. I grew up not far at all from the Oregon Trail in western Nebraska. And so I don't remember a ton about the plot of this book at all, and I haven't read it, probably since I was in elementary school, but I remember there's a very specific image. It's about a woman who essentially comes from Maine to be a mail order bride for a man who has lost his wife and has 2 young children and lives on the plains. And I had to like do a quick skim of it before I started talking this afternoon because I couldn't remember any of it. What I can remember is there's one scene in which Sarah cuts the kid's hair, and she lets it, she cuts it on the back porch, and then she lets it blow out and tells them that the birds will gather it up and put it in their nest. And there's no particular reason that scene sticks, it just does. And I think it kind of speaks particularly to the way that I respond to literature, which is that I respond to images. So it's the moments that stick in my head. Very often I'll read a book and then I can't remember the plot, and I can never remember characters' names. It was a real problem in grad school. I can't remember authors, like, no idea. But I can tell you, like, halfway through the book, Sarah cuts the kid's hair. Caleb's, the younger boy, has these dark curls. I remember him having dark curly hair. And she blows it off her hand and says the birds will get it, and the kids laugh and think it's great, and then they go looking for it later in the book. And I remember nothing else. I think she stays. I think she has a cat. I don't really know. But that image has stuck with me since I was 6. So I think that kind of, I was clued in pretty early to what I thought was powerful about books, which is this idea of images. So I studied English in college along with German, which was also a lot of literature. Taught English for a year in Austria at a golf high school, which was great. I don't play golf, but sometimes I use it to get a little.
I bet they listened a lot, didn't they?
I was gonna say, I sometimes use it to get a little extra cred with Molly, but otherwise it was not. The golf part was not particularly useful. Although I was in this tiny town of 1,500 people called Steyrsbach, and it's in eastern Austria, and it has the largest golf course in Europe for no apparent reason. Like 1,500 people, 45-hole golf course. Great, makes total sense. And then I came back and went to grad school, and I thought when I went to grad school that I was gonna study women's memoir. I was pretty sure 20th century women's memoir. I had done my undergraduate thesis on memoirs by Lillian Hellman and another author whose name I don't remember right now. It starts with a V. It'll come to me later. About their relationships with their mothers and lying and truth-telling and all this different stuff. So I was sure when I went to grad school that's what I was going to study. And then my first semester in grad school, I took a medieval seminar and thought, nope, this is it. This is it forever. It's me and Chaucer, and we're besties, and that's the end of it. Because medieval literature is just so weird. It's so weird, and it's so funny a lot of the time, and it's filled, I think, with imagery in a way that even modern literature sometimes can't capture, because a lot of times it's written to be heard, and it's written so that there are episodes that will stick in people's memories, and they can tell it again, and they can share it without having to read it all the time. And I mean, we can get into literacy and patterns of story sharing and all of that stuff. But so I got into medieval literature, and then I took a seminar on Old English literature, so the really old stuff, the stuff before 1100. And I took this seminar on. Oh no, wait! I took a language class on Old English. So I learned Old English, which if you looked at it on a page, unless you had special training, you probably wouldn't be able to read it. Looks nothing like modern English, looks a lot like German. And then, so then I was in this reading group, and we were reading A Saint's Life. And so my second book is this. It's not a book that I have because it's out of print, but it's a book that I wrote part of my dissertation on. And we were reading The Saint's Life, and my dissertation chair had just picked it out at random because he thought it was real weird. There's a lot of Old English saints' lives about cross-dressing saints. They're almost always women. They almost always cross-dress because they don't want to get married to some dude and have to be no longer virgins, and they want to, stay married to God and whatever. It's a very common story, but he had picked this one out, and he was like, this one's just a little weird. We're going to read it. And so we did, and it's a really strange story. So it's Euphrosyne, who I'm sure nobody has ever heard of. She's not even in the canon of saints anymore, because she was probably imaginary. But she grows up with these parents who are devout. Her mother dies. She gets older, she becomes very beautiful. Her father decides, okay, she's ready, I'm gonna marry her off to someone. And she says, no, I really would rather not. And he says, well, you're going to. And then he makes the mistake of leaving for the weekend. And she says, well, here's my chance. And she cuts her hair into a tonsure, which is that haircut where they shave it in the middle and then it's just this around, and she dresses like a man and she runs away, but she says, if I run away to the women's convent, my dad will know to look for me there. It's too obvious, so I'm going to run away to the men's convent. So she does, and she lives there for 30 years, and her father finds out that she's left, is very upset, goes to the men's convent, and goes to the abbot and says, you know, pray for me, my daughter is missing, I can't find her. And the abbot's like, yes, we're praying for you, your daughter's missing, it's terrible. It's probably totally coincidental that we have this new, very beautiful male monk that has showed up. And then he continues, the abbot has him pray with this new male monk. The father continues to pray with this new male monk, like, weekly for 30 years, never has a clue. And then the monk admits on the deathbed that, in fact, I am your daughter, don't tell anyone, I want to die as a monk. The monk dies, and then immediately the father's like, it's my daughter! And so it's this really strange story, because there's something that happens with the pronouns in the Old English, that the moment that the daughter says, I'm a monk, and she gives herself the name Smaragdus, which means emerald in Greek, I think, the narrative switches her pronouns. She goes from female to male, and it says Smaragdus, and it says him and the abbot. There's this cool moment. I'm just going to give you a little taste of Old English because I so rarely get to read it now. So this is the moment when the abbot gives this new monk Smaragdus to a mentor named Agapetus. The gesichtet se abbot an a brother to him, se was yenemned Agapetus, haligus liefus manu, and worthful on theum, and betachte him thon a forsedden smaragdum, and him toquath, henenforth, this shall be in thine sunu, this shall be your son, and thine learning knecht, and your learning boy, Agapetus the underfeng hina on his cheatin. And so then Agapetus takes this boy into his house. And so there's this moment where the saint's life seems to really recognize that this is not just a woman masquerading as a man, this is a woman who has become a man. And I remember sitting in that reading group when we're talking about it, and my advisor is talking about, okay, you know, this is the tradition of cross-dressing saints, and thinking, no, there's something more going on here. This is not just cross-dressing. This is not just a woman putting on the clothing of a man and calling it good. Like, she lives as a man for 30 years and wants to be recognized as a man and wants to be buried as a man. And so I think what we're seeing here actually is a transgender saint. And we're seeing the ways in which gender was not fixed in the Old English world, and we're seeing the ways in which gender could be manipulated in the service of religious devotion and in the service of not fulfilling the traditional role of a woman and being married to a man for what she calls vain reasons, namely money. And so that's one of the things that I wrote about, and I think one of the themes that connects these three books and that connects a lot of the things that I read is kind of women pushing back against what is traditionally expected of them, or women realizing what is traditionally expected of them and how chafing that can be. So that's what I wrote about for my dissertation. That's what I teach about a lot, or taught about when I taught. And I like the weird texts, the weird medieval stuff that students go, wait, what? Why are we reading this? What is happening? Who's doing what? Why is her hair cut like that? Because I think that weirdness gives like a way into texts. It's okay to acknowledge that texts can be weird. So the last book I brought, I was really dithering around. For a long time, I didn't read after grad school, or during grad school even. I don't know, when you study English and when you study literature, like, reading becomes work, and you do it with a pen in your hand, and you have to take notes, and you have to do this very specific kind of thinking that's exhausting, and so it's a lot easier to just flip on Netflix and watch, I don't know, 150 episodes of Great British Bake Off over and over again. It's much less stressful, and so I got my job at Lindenwood out of grad school in 2012, and probably until 2016 I didn't really read for pleasure very much. I was obviously still reading for work, and maybe here and there I'd pick something up if somebody was really jazzy about it, but almost nothing. And then I got invited to be part of a book club, and I was like, fine, I'll read one book a month. I can put up with that. And it has reminded me totally how much I love reading for just reading's sake. And I think it's reminded me how much reading is supposed to be about sharing a text, and you're not supposed to sit monk-like in your cell and just read your book and then put it down and you're done, right? Reading is a conversation between the author and the reader. It's a conversation between readers who encounter that book. It's a conversation between the author and the world. So it's always supposed to be this sort of exchange, and I don't know, grad school makes that exchange so transactional that it can be hard to recover from it. And I see many English teachers in the room just like nodding very gravely. So this is, I literally picked this because it's the most recent book that my book club read. We discussed it last night. It's The Bluest by Toni Morrison. We selected it because Toni Morrison just died. I selected it today because I can definitely remember the plot, mostly. No guarantees on character names, but it's, I had to read Beloved when I was in, I think, high school, and then again as an undergrad, and then probably again some point in grad school, and then I taught it. It's a hard book. It's a very good book. It's beautiful, but it's devastating, right? It's about a woman who has to kill her child to escape from slavery. And The Bluest is devastating on a smaller scale. It's about children, and it's about what it's like to be growing up as a Black child in Lorain, Ohio in the early 1940s. And it's about the moment when these three Black girls realize how ugly they are and how ugly the world sees them to be, and how that reinforces their sense of ugliness, which is due to their dark skin, to their sort of low status position, to their class status. And one of the girls, who suffers a traumatic rape at the hands of her father, kind of has a mental break and believes that if she only had blue eyes, everything would be okay. And I'm really simplifying this. It's an incredibly complex novel, and I don't think I would have read it. I certainly would not have chosen to have read it on my own for grins, because it's not really that kind of book. It's not the kind of thing where you get home from work, you put everything down, you get everything sorted out, and then you're like, what shall I read to wind down today? I think this book about childhood trauma in the 1940s among young Black girls would be great. But it's an important book, and it's a beautiful book. It's so lovely. Toni Morrison, I think, is better at ending novels than anyone in the world. And she writes this sort of ending that I just want to read it over and over again. And she does this in jazz, and she does it in Beloved too. But she talks about love is never any better than the lover. Wicked people love wickedly, violent people love violently, weak people love weakly, stupid people love stupidly. But the love of a free man is never safe. There is no gift for the beloved. The lover alone possesses his gift of love. The loved one is shorn, neutralized, frozen in the glare of the lover's inward eye. Which is just, it's devastatingly sad for the little girl who narrates this novel to end with that idea that love is something that makes someone who is loved powerless and less. And so it's just this incredible novel that I never would have come to without that book club and without that group of women reading with me, and keeping me accountable to read things that are more than just cozy mysteries or easy romance novels or the kind of light nonsense that's on the internet that you would normally read to wind down. So that's the story of how I read.
question I actually stole from Gillian. How do you read? You know, when you read, kind of, you know, do you do audio? Do you do e?
I do all of the above. I would not clean the house if it were not for audiobooks. I pretty much have to be listening to an audiobook or a podcast to like incentivize myself to unload the dishwasher or to definitely to vacuum, like I vacuum with headphones in. I bought myself a Kindle on Prime Day this year, like a new fancy one with the buttons that go up and down. It's great. I read a lot on the Kindle. I always thought for sure like true books were the only things for me, but no, I love the Kindle. So yeah, I read, and I sneak it in kind of wherever I can.
Very cool. Very cool. Other questions for Dr. Mann? All right. Molly, you.
So Erin gave me the chance to go first, and I really probably should have taken it.
I warned you. I told you.
For those of you that have worked with us or been around us, this is going to be the most polar opposite conversation to what she just did that you have ever heard.
Which I think anybody who has a conversation with both of us at the same time kind of gets that.
So before I guess I get into any kind of a inspiration or theme on my career, to go back to a childhood book to maybe just kind of let you know who I am and where reading comes from for me. Probably my favorite childhood books were Dr. Seuss books. And for no other reason other than that they rhymed and they were fun and you can remember them easily. So the one fish, blue fish, two fish, one fish, two fish, red fish, blue fish was all my style. And you know, kind of the same thing for me. Now, I typically have every year found some kind of a really good book to do some kind of self-motivation, self-help, something like that. But other than that, my reading tends to be either very kind of inspirational of someone who has come from down here and made their way in life, or something that is just kind of fun and entertaining to read. And I would say, unfortunately, over the last year or so, kind of coinciding with this job I decided to take, there hasn't been a whole lot of reading other than the article that Marilyn sends me to read 14 times a day.
Everybody's always sending us articles to read.
So, but I guess just to kind of highlight that there is a little bit, as I sat to look at books, as to what I would talk to you about of a career or where I would go from a literary standpoint. There is probably a theme, and some of that does go to a career, I would think, in that I have kind of backdoored my way into higher ed a little bit. I don't have the traditional background where I thought, oh, I'm gonna go a PhD route and I will definitely be this college professor who is going to teach theory and research and those kind of things. I was very fortunate to start a consulting business and begin a career in higher education after working in college athletics for a few years and after going to law school. And I have found my niche and way into the academic side of higher education and love it. But you know, really have loved the how can you shape lives, how do you teach very practical things. And one thing that you will see out of the books that you're going to hear about from me is a lot of it is just very practical. And so a couple of, after we've moved on from Dr. Seuss. So my background was that I was a college golfer. I have an undergraduate degree in finance, and really my undergraduate degree, I was a good student because I knew I was supposed to be a good student, but I really ate, drank, and slept a lot of golf. And so one of the books that what most people won't think has anything to do with life lessons, but is all about golf, that has inspired me was Harvey Pinnock's Little Red Book. So Harvey Pinnock is actually, he passed away, but for, I would say, if you go back 20 years ago, he became a golf icon, and he taught golf for over 83 years, and he wrote a couple of very small books, and he was a man of very few words, and everything was extremely simple. Basically, a line from one of the books would have been, if you play poorly one day, forget it. If you play poorly the next time out, review your fundamentals. Check your grip, check your stance, check your aim, check your ball position. Most of your mistakes are made before the club has ever swung. But everything with that book was very practical. For those of you that play golf or that even watch golf remotely at this point, you will see that every angle is analyzed, there is launch speed analyzed. It's just like any sport. Technology has completely overtaken the game, and it's the reason everybody's so good and you get it. But for years, this simple approach was what got people through. And I think a lot of times when you hear some golfer that says, "Oh my gosh, I'm in my own way, I can't make a putt anymore," one of the things that they always go back to is basically keep it simple, stupid. I'm going to go back to the way I learned. I'm going to check my grip. I'm going to check my stance. And it's been interesting. My consulting business worked with junior golfers, and then I have a nephew that is also just going through the college golf process, and he is so analytical, and there is always something just off by an nth of a degree in his swing, and I always just say, you're lined up there. And that's kind of, if you move into who I am, or for those of you that have worked for me from a career standpoint, I tend to keep things fairly simple. And I guess I hadn't ever really put it together, but this is one of the books, and the way he taught is very much the way that I learned the best. As you go back to fundamentals, you try to keep processes and things simple, and typically it leads to good success if you can kind of get out of your own head and out of your own way. So that probably gives you a little bit of a background as to, as I began my career and who I was as a college golfer. I would move then into a little bit of the same kind of philosophies. So one of my other books that I came upon, and it was probably right out of college. I don't even know when this book was published, but it is fairly old. I say old because I guess I feel like I'm old. So 1998. So right as I was finishing college in law school, I did my law degree at the University of Tennessee, and I spent 3 years bleeding orange. And so I was probably one of those people. I'm not sure I picked my law school in the right way, but I picked my law school because I really thought I wanted to get into NCAA compliance and higher college athletics. And so I went to law school at the University of Tennessee for a couple of reasons. One, they had just built a new state-of-the-art law school, and two, they had an unbelievable athletic department with a great female athletic director. They were one of the few athletic departments that still had an entirely male and an entirely female athletic department all the way up until just a few years ago. And so I had the opportunity through law school to work and be mentored by an athletic director there who was amazing. But I also had the opportunity to sit through practice and watch Pat Summitt. This will tell you how old I was. I was fortunate to come out of my undergraduate athletic career with an AD who knew Pat Summitt well, and I was at law school and in my first 3 weeks and miserable, and all of a sudden I had a phone message from Pat Summitt on my answering machine in my apartment, and I thought the world had ended, because she just called to make sure I was okay, because somebody had told her that I was away from home and in law school and may need somebody to talk to. And within a week I'd had an appointment with her, and we weren't close, don't get me wrong, but you at least had a relationship. And so when her book was published, so I can put it up or I'll show it, and then I've got a couple of things. But she wrote a couple of books, and one of them was Reach for the Summit. And essentially this is her words and wisdom. Every chapter basically gives her essentially 12 items of discipline. So this is how I lead my life, this is how I lead my teams, this is why I'm successful. And just to go through a couple of those that I thought were fairly relevant for my life: respect yourself and others, take full responsibility, learn to be a great communicator, discipline yourself so no one else has to. I guess this was one of those books that you read that makes an impact on life. And actually, as I started teaching in sport management here, this was one of the books that I had a lot of students who got to choose a book to read would pick this out. But so just a couple of, from her, and a lot of what she gives is, this is how I operated with my teams, this is how I got all of my players to buy in. And if anyone watched college basketball when she was coaching, her players would run through a wall for her. And it wasn't because she was really very nice to them. It just is, I mean, she was brutal. For an example, one of the stories in here from the chapter that talks about be a great communicator, she goes into why communicating is important, but then she also goes into communication depends on, you know, your tone, it depends on the words you deliver and who you're talking to. And as she said, many times communication is not saying anything at all. So at one point she had a team, as college students do, who went out drinking one night, and she knew they were all stinking hungover when they came to practice. And obviously her inclination was to just rip them up and down. And instead she made a decision that basically actions could speak louder than words. Now this part somebody may not like, but you probably couldn't do this anymore. But she set out in the gym 4 trash cans, and essentially she just said run. And they ran for 5 hours without stopping, and the trash cans were full by the time she finished. And they all heard her. And again, I'm not saying that is exactly the method of communication, but it went to the way she tells the story. It goes to, sometimes it's more actions speak louder than words. So it goes a lot. I think one of the quotes she says is, and then following that, she said, why is communication important? It's because you can't do anything without it. It's necessary to avoid confusion and confrontation. It's vital to any successful organization. When you communicate, you eliminate mistakes. Everyone understands the system, understands their responsibilities within the system, and understands how to carry them out. And it just, again, it kind of goes to the simple things in life. And then it also goes, again, you think, I can't believe those players still like her or listen to her after an event like that. But one of the things she also says is that as she started her career, and I think all of us, as we start a career, whether you're a teacher, sometimes you feel like you have to command respect because you make everyone know that you're smarter than them, or by yelling at someone, or I'm going to command this classroom because no one's going to come in late. And that's how she said when she first started her coaching career she was the intimidation factor. I would argue she was probably an intimidation factor all the way through. But she did say, my ideas on how to command respect have changed since I first started coaching. I've learned you can't demand it or whack it out of people with a 2x4. You have to cultivate it in yourself, and you cultivate it with those around you. There is no such thing as self-respect without respect for others. And I'm going to kind of go on. Respect is essential for building any kind of group cohesion. So again, I think I just lead that a little bit from a career standpoint. If I'm leading it in, there are some simple lessons in life, whether they're things your parents teach you, whether they're things that you learn from mentors as you grow up, whether you learn it as you read a book, that really can be very, very simple words and simple things to think about, but that can obviously have a very, very big impact in your life. So I will finish, I guess, one more book that I have read, I guess, most recently, and I won't tell you it was this year, that I think goes along the same lines, and it is called Grit. It's by Angela Duckworth, and this was actually just recommended to me a couple of years ago. And I think I am one that tends to like stories of people who have become successful. Like one of the other books that I had on my list that I'm not going to go into was Seabiscuit, because Seabiscuit was the horse that nobody thought was any good and was never going to make it, and then all of a sudden, you know, he's winning millions in Triple Crowns, and so you can overcome anything. And I think that a lot of the stories that are in Angela Duckworth's book Grit also do the same thing. One of the ones that stood out to me, and I said this a lot as I worked with kids, and I say it a lot as I work with students, is you hear somebody tell a student, hey, you have a lot of potential, you just have to figure out what to do with it. Or you have a lot of talent, you just have to figure out what to do with it. And I think one of the things my college golf coach taught me, there was a saying, and this book kind of goes along with it in the chapter that talks about effort counts twice. I always said this, I'd rather be lucky than good, and the harder I practice, the luckier I get. And I think that kind of goes with as you go through life, some of the things, obviously people are in the right place at the right time and good things happen to them. You know, there is something, I can never be a concert pianist because I just don't have that skill. And I don't care how hard I practice, I would never be a concert pianist nor vocalist. But, so there is something to be said about a little bit of just raw talent. However, there are a lot of things that you can also cultivate or at least do well in life or be successful in life if you're just willing to put the time in it. And maybe there's a little bit of luck involved, but as that says, the harder I work, the luckier I get. So I will leave you a little bit with just my kind of pleasure reading. And I guess my pleasure reading goes to also at least the JD behind my name. If I have my choice of books to read when I can just do pleasure reading, I tend to read things like John Grisham novels. I have no idea whether in the literary world he's actually a good writer. I know none of that, but I have always enjoyed them. And so, you know, I think a lot of, I tried to tie this in of, oh, there's this reason I went to law school because I knew I wanted to be like the attorney in Time to Kill, where I could defend somebody for righteousness and, you know, it was the right thing to do. And that is one of my favorite books. It's one of his first novels. The Firm was probably one of his first few books that really I got into, and I thought, wow, this is really cool. I could be a lawyer. I will tell you, by the time I went to law school, I really had a pretty good idea I wasn't going to prosecute anybody, and I really had a pretty good idea that there was no way I could be a defense attorney. As much as I think it's a really great thing, and as much as I like to talk and I feel like I could stand up in front of a jury and be all right, they didn't necessarily inspire my need or what I'm doing in life, but I think the books are really good, and if I get a chance to read on a vacation, I typically read something like that as well. So that's kind of my overview.
Very cool. So how do you read, Molly?
So I am, this is me, I'm trying to be better, but I do kill paper a lot. Like I kill trees some because I like to print things out. And I am still pretty old school with the fact that I like to have a book in my hand. I do download and read on an iPad, but or a Kindle, but for the most part, if I can pick up a book and read it, I would just as soon pick up a book and read it.
And I noticed, are you a note taker in the book, highlighter?
So, yes. And I will do. I spend enough time in the car here and there that I'll do a book on tape if I'm in car, or audiobook if I'm in the car. But for the most part, it would be a hardback or a book.
Other questions? There we go, Kristen.
When you go to a bookstore, this is for both of you, do you know what you're there to buy, or do you browse?
Anymore, I probably know what I'm there to buy. I wouldn't have told you that in the era where we actually went to a mall and walked through it and then said, oh, let me stop in a bookstore. I could browse in a bookstore and something catch my eye, but I have not done that in a long time.
Oh, I'm 100% a browser. I did have to go to Half Price Books on Friday because I needed to read the Bluest for book club. And it was checked out of this library, it was checked out of the public library, so I had to go to Half Price Books and get it, and then I, of course, this afternoon found it on my bookshelf, so I have 2 copies now. But usually I'm a browser, so this summer my mom and I went to Scotland, and we probably went to, I don't know, 15, 20, 25 bookstores just to wander through and see what there was to see. We did not buy as many things as we could have because there are suitcase weight limits, but yeah, I am a browser that comes from a family of browsers.
I tend to get a lot of books by somebody says, oh, you should read this, I know you'll like it, and go from there.
Do you have a favorite St. Louis bookstore?
I do not.
I mean, I think Left Bank is the easy option.
That would have been the only one I could have said. That's what I've been there.
There's one on, is it Big Bend? I can't remember what it's called, but it's very cute. And half price is always reliable.
And do you get recommendations from your students, you know, for, hey, read this or check this out?
I actually do, obviously not right now because I don't have that many students, but in my grad school classes, I always made them, books were part of what they had to do. It was just one of the things that so many of them gave up reading. So you have to remember, I taught a lot of sport management students. Reading may not have been high on their list. So what happened out of that is that the students in the class that really did read a lot gave a lot of good recommendations. Now I will say some on pleasure reading books, but a lot on books like this or figures that have really been successful in like the sport business industry, things to take up. There are a couple of great books on The Fixes In is one of them about how basically every professional sporting event is fixed. So all of those kind of recommendations that I've read, I don't necessarily believe that, but the book has some pretty good evidence. But that those books, students did have really good recommendations on some of that.
I do sometimes. I don't know if English majors are the ones that want to recommend things will recommend things very aggressively, and then a lot of them are just, I think, intimidated. But yeah, I had a student recommend Galway Kinnell, who's an Irish poet, and I did pick up his book, and it did not resonate with me, even though I do love poetry. Students very often want to recommend movies and Netflix things to me lately, which, you know, I accept gratefully and then generally don't watch just because I'm bad at watching things. But yeah, not as much as you might think.
I was wondering if you felt like you had a hair theme in your books. There was a lot of hair. Like both of the things you remember out of your books. Oh yeah, that's true. I had not thought about that. Well, and I'm trying to think in The Bluest Eye, there's not a ton of hair, but yeah, I don't know. Hair speaks to me, I guess.
She's thinking like a lit crit.
Yeah, that's good. It's thematic.
Well, my final question for you, Erin, is what books were you thinking of that didn't make the cut? This is just me selfishly because I love.
Oh, that's fine. So I have a short story collection on my desk by Helen Oyeyemi called "What Is Not Yours Is Not Yours" that my book club read, that I loved but decided not to talk about because I don't want to give the impression that I actually enjoy short stories on a regular basis. That is the exception rather than the rule. I also, like, I was thinking about this as I was walking in, like, I also prefer, like, television series over movies. I like a long story. So short stories don't generally work for me, but those are linked short stories and they're very weird. Like, one is about a school for puppeteers that turns into a story about a guy who, like, one of the students at the school randomly knows a guy who has to babysit this goldfish, which turns into a huge bit of drama, and then it's, I don't know, they're very strange, and I liked them a lot. And then I had Yaa Gyasi's Homegoing, which is also a book club book that we read last year. It's about two half-sisters in Africa in the 1830s or 40s. They're born in neighboring villages. They don't know each other, and the book traces their sort of family lineage. As one woman is abducted and becomes a slave, and the other woman stays in Africa, and it sort of traces the family stories until they come back around again in a few generations and meet. And it's good, but it's hard to talk about. If possible, it's even sadder than The Bluest Eye. And I promise my book club sometimes reads things that are uppers, but just in the last few months we've been on a tear. So yeah, I don't know. That was the stack.
Cool.
I was gonna say, I hadn't thought about this until right now, but one of the things, I don't know what this says about my father, but one of the things my dad started to do, it was right about as I went to college, and it may have even been in high school. Every Christmas, they were his books. He went out to get them. He would always buy me 2 books, and one of them was always a pleasure, fun, something good to read like that, and one of them was always, how to make money in the stock market, or how to be, 12 habits of highly influential people, or what. So every Christmas, and still today, he buys me 2 books, one to read for pleasure and one that he thinks will make a difference in my life in some way, shape, or form.
Do you read them?
I do. Yeah.
Good.
Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you all for coming, and thank you again to our associate provost for giving great talks. And if anyone wants some free library swag specifically for your reading, like book flags and pins, have at it. Thank you all for coming and tuning in. Thank you.